Hello, welcome back to Crushing Sounds. My name is Chris, and today we are reviewing the new Iron Maiden album, Senjutsu. So it's that fabled time when the legends of the genre Iron Maiden release their brand new studio album. We have at last arrived at the 17th studio effort, Senjutsu, not including live albums compilation, 17 albums strong. This being one of the big releases of the year, no doubt, and it being one of the biggest metal bands of all time, all of us at Crushing Sounds are going to come together for this review to share our thoughts on the album. So this video will be in three parts. Myself, Mike, and then Ruben will be sharing our thoughts on the album. We wanted to do our Zoom call-esque style videos to do a group review for this, but due to scheduling conflicts, we're doing it like this. I don't know all of their thoughts, they don't know all of mine, so this is going to be an interesting experience for us as well as it is for you. Hopefully mildly interesting. So, Senjutsu, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it, but it is the band's first album in 6 years, which apparently, as far as I'm aware, is the longest gap between two albums from Iron Maiden. Their previous album, The Book of Souls, appeared to be somewhat divisive amongst the Iron Maiden fan base. It's not too dissimilar to this album, but a lot of contention is whether this album is better than Book of Souls or is Book of Souls better than this album. I, for the record, really liked Book of Souls. I loved a fair few of the tracks. It was a little bit on the long side. There were a couple I didn't care for, but on the whole, I really enjoyed that album. The highlights on the album were really good. So despite that slight cynicism in the wake of Maiden's modern output, I was anticipating this album to be short, as I'm sure a lot of us were, so let's dive right into the new album, Senjutsu. So I'm sure this isn't going to be the first time this is mentioned, but this album is 10 tracks long and an hour and 20 minutes. So the songs are, for the most part, on the longer side. All but two of them are 7 minutes plus, with the last three tracks being over 10. This, I know, has already been a point of contention for a lot of fans. Do these songs justify their length or not? And then by extension, does the album as a whole justify its length? Now, I love long songs. Tool, Opeth, Devin Townsend, my favourite tracks from those artists are their longer songs, so I have no problem whatsoever with an album full of long songs. The problem when you do that, though, is you've got to make sure that the pacing is spot on, because a track that doesn't quite hit the mark in that respect on an album this long is just all the more difficult to sit through. But, you know, Iron Maiden have done long songs before, so one can expect that they probably would be able to take to this like a duck to water, right? So with that, Senjutsu, I don't like it. I'm sorry, I don't like this album. I don't hate it, to be fair. There are moments that I do like, but the big problem here is that these moments are moments, and they are buried in a sea of fluff and filler that drag this album down to really slow levels. Out of the 10 tracks, I can point to 3 that feel like their length is justified, and it just so happens that those are the 3 shortest songs on the album. So what that says to me is that however many members are in the band are involved in the editing, in the writing process of these songs, clearly didn't want to edit them, or thought that, or was incapable of editing them down to their perfect length, really. Whether it's the prime songwriter for each song or the band as a whole, no one seems to want to keep each song at its best length. The long songs, they don't need to be long. They just don't. Not every idea can be stretched into 10 minutes long. A song has an optimum length, and whether that's 18 minutes Empire of the Clouds, which is perfect, or it's 4 or 5 minutes of Speed of Light, which is perfect. It's that every song has its optimum length, and I feel like a lot of these songs are just way overblown. And the annoying thing is, as I've mentioned earlier, they have done this well in the past. Iron Maiden have written long songs that are huge and epic, I mentioned Empire of the Clouds again from Book of Souls. That's longer than anything on this album, but its length is justified. But rather than writing songs to said optimum length, this feels like them trying to write long songs, not writing songs that are long because that's what the song needs. So they drag like to a huge degree. I should talk about some tracks now specifically, shouldn't I? It starts out okay. The title track, which opens the album, has a good intro to set up what we're going to hear. And of course, the first time Bruce Dickinson's vocals come in on any album is always a big moment. It's also one of the more memorable choruses on the album, one I can actually recall after my first listen. It's also the first track which showcases the sort of synthy string instrumentation thing that fills out the background of all of these songs. I quite like that in this song. It gives it a little bit more of an epic feel to it. However, more on that aspect later. The second track, Stratego, is that how you pronounce it? Is one of the better songs again, to be fair. Another more memorable chorus, and this one is the right length. However, it was here I noticed Bruce's vocal melodies following the guitars again. This is nothing new. It's been done a lot on previous modern Maiden albums, but for some reason here it felt a lot more tedious. Maybe it's because the album feels tedious, so this element just feels worse, but I find that kind of following the guitar almost every time very, very predictable, and it just adds to how monotonous this album feels. Obviously, I don't know if Bruce is following the guitars or the guitars are following him, but it happens way, way too often. And I slightly praised the synthy string thing earlier on the first track, but by this point I was starting to get really ear-grating. I don't know if the mixing is the same in every format that one can hear this album, but on the version I heard, the mix is not very good. And on this song, the synthy string things, they're too dominant and they're really irritating to listen to. It was ear-piercing at this point, and they sounded really cheap. Like, this band could easily afford a proper string ensemble should they wish to do that, and I think it would have been way better at selling this epic vibe, better than the noise that this instrument brings. The Writing on the Wall is my favourite song on the album, mostly just because it's different. The driving western riff is catchy as hell, it isn't too long, and it's just simple and effective. It's not much in the way of fluff. To be fair, I have known this song obviously a lot longer than the rest of the album because it came out, I think it was the first song that came out, but who knows, maybe the rest of the album is going to grow on me in time, and to be fair, I can see this album potentially being a grower to a lot of people just because there's so much in it. There's a lot to unpack, but I think it requires just too much dissecting to get through the tedious stuff, to get to the really good stuff. There are some good moments scattered later on. The first few minutes of Lost in a Lost World is probably my favourite section of the album. The acoustic guitars, the vocal melodies, they're a nice change of pace to what's been coming before. Then the rest of the song goes on way, way, way too long, and it's so tedious. I think the big problem here is how all these songs are very similar in their feel, all very mid-tempo and very ploddy. Book of Souls is a longer album than this one, but tracks like Speed of Light and Death or Glory really give the album momentum that this album is sorely lacking. A lot of the second half of these songs are so surplus to requirement, and by that I mean there are too many guitar solos. Hey, I'm a guitarist, I'm allowed to say it. There are way, way, way too many. So many of these songs will drop all vocals in the second half and have the three guitarists juggle back and forth for sometimes 5+ minutes. That would be fine in a couple songs to, show off your chops, this is your spotlight moment, but so many of them do this and they just lose all impact. It becomes way too predictable and really frustrating when you're just like, can we please move on? Also, this just compounds the issue of Bruce copying the guitar lines, because when we get through the guitar solos and back to Bruce, he's just mimicking something that's already there, so it doesn't hit as hard as it nearly could do. What I will say though, and I do genuinely mean this as a point of praise, is this album is very thematically consistent and clear. All the songs belong together on this album. None feel out of place. They all feel part of the same narrative, if that makes any sense. So in respect, I do get the trajectory of this album, but again, I stress this once more, the biggest problem with this album is its length. And by that, I don't just mean it's long, I mean there is nowhere near enough substance to warrant that length. So much of this album could have been and should have been trimmed. It yearns to be epic, but there is so much dead air. Take out one of the 3 10-minute tracks and shorten everything else by a bit, and we would have a much better album. Being long for the sake of long is not the same as being epic. Book of Souls, I think, does what this album was trying to do, but way better. I heard this album several times, but so much gets lost on me, it just goes over my head. There are moments of that great Iron Maiden sound, but so much just doesn't need to be there. I broke my cardinal rule when I listened to this album for the 4th time, and that is I didn't listen to it all the way through. I always, especially when I'm reviewing an album, will listen to it in its entirety to get the full effect, but on the 4th listen I was just so burnt out on this thing. I had to just take a break and come back, and if anything I think that enhances the album. Get halfway through, take a break and come back and listen to the rest, because my god, is it an ordeal to get through this thing repeatedly. If I ever come back to this album, it's not to listen to it all the way through. I just can't be bothered to do that again. We've seen, like when bands like Metallica, for example, become incapable of editing their material in later albums. I pray this isn't now the case with Iron Maiden. I really do not see why people think this is a masterpiece, because it isn't. But that being said, I don't see why people think it's a big piece of shit either, because it isn't. It's fine. It's way too long, but it's fine. I didn't think I'd go so hard on this album. I thought I'd come away saying it was decent, but when I can barely call to mind a lot of the album after 5 listens, that kind of says it all to me. It might grow on me in time, and it is still Iron Maiden. I still love Bruce on the vocals. I still love the talent of the guitar players when they're reined in a little bit. And from what I hear, Nico on the drums is drumming better than he has in a very long time. So there is a lot to like here. It's just way down in a sea of stuff that just isn't interesting to me. But who knows, I could be full of shit. Who knows? And we'll find out very quickly if I'm full of shit, because I got 2 way bigger Iron Maiden fans coming up next. So I will now pass on to Michael for his thoughts on Senjutsu. Okay, here we go. It's now my time to talk about the brand new album from Iron fucking Maiden. Their 17th studio album, Senjutsu, came out last week. And I'm going to try and be as unbiased as possible, because some of you may or may not know, Iron Maiden are my favourite band of all time. I've seen them live many times. I've got all their albums, some of which I've got on CD and vinyl. I've got several patches of them on my jacket. I cannot get enough of this band. So I was very excited when they announced this album back in July. So expectations were high, to say the least. It's been a while since Book of Souls. It's actually the longest gap they've ever had between 2 albums, so there was a lot of people expecting big things from this album. When Writing on the Wall was released back in July, I watched the live premiere of it when it came out, and my opinions were pretty good. I enjoyed it at the time. I do think they should have opened the first single should have been a bit more of a fast-paced, hard-hitting Maiden song. Like with Book of Souls, they released Speed of Light right out of the gate, and it was an incredible way to introduce the album. But over time, this actually has grown to be one of my favourite songs on the album. Speaking of the album, I have it here. Look at that. So I want to get one thing out of the way with this album cover. We don't normally talk about album covers, but I want to address this. Whilst this is a brilliant design of Eddie, I don't like how on this album and the one before, The Book of Souls, it's a great design of Eddie on a nothing background. If you look at... I'm going to show off about my collection here. If you look at albums like The Number of the Beast, Somewhere in Time, or one of the best album covers of all time, Power Slave, it's Eddie in a cool setting. Ancient Egypt, the future, hell. That's what makes the covers so cool. But if you open this triple gatefold, inside you've got a lavish in a picture. Why couldn't you use this as the front cover? Something like this would have been way cooler. Anyway, that's a tangent. We're not here to talk about art. We're here to talk about music, which is art. There's a segue. Right, anyway, getting into the album. I'm going to try and not say what Chris and Ruben said, because otherwise this will be repetitive, but you should know right off the bat, if you don't like Modern Maiden, i.e., when I say Modern Maiden, I mean Brave New World onwards, if you don't like what they've been doing since then, you won't like this album. It's not going to convince you otherwise. It's not going to turn you on to what they're doing now. It's very similar to what they were doing on A Matter of Life and Death and The Final Frontier, and definitely The Book of Souls. It's very similar in that the songs are long, the songs are epic, the songs are mid-tempo for the most part. Sorry, pop filter. But, you know, I happen to really like that style of Maiden. I think it's really cool, so for the most part, yes, I did really enjoy this album. But we'll go over some highlights that I particularly liked, and the first thing I noticed was Nico's drumming. Not just his performance, but the production of it's really good. His kick drum has never sounded like this before. It punches through the mix really well. It's not very muddy. The snare sounds really cool. And his playing is really good, particularly on the title track. He's doing this kind of like tribal beat thing, which is kind of new for him. And I could be wrong, but I didn't hear his classic overused drum beat, which he uses in a lot of his stuff. If you want to know what I mean, listen to Rainmaker on Dance of Death. Listen to, I'm sure there's another example, I can't think off the top of my head, but you'll know it when you hear it. That's not on this album. He's actually diversified a little bit, which I thought was really cool. And another thing which I really enjoyed, which a lot of people I think are really pointing out with this album, is the guitar solos are stellar. Yes, there are a lot of them. Yes, some of them go on for quite a while, but, you know, you've got three of the greatest guitarists in heavy metal. You might as well use them to your advantage and have them shred and do really clever and nice riffing and melodic ideas and harmonies, and it sounds really cool. And yeah, in that sense, this album has everything you want from a modern Iron Maiden record. So that's kind of specific things I like out of the way. The tracks that I have found I've been going back to quite a lot is The Writing on the Wall. I've gone back to that loads. Days of Future Past. This is kind of, it's like Speed of Light. It's a more fast-paced modern Maiden song, which I think will be a lot of people's favourite track on the album. It's certainly one of my favourites. It's also relatively short in comparison to everything else on this album. I think it's less than 5 minutes, which for this album is really short. But it's got some really cool riffing. The kind of solo guitar riff near the beginning reminds me a lot of The Wicker Man, so that's right up my street. I got a real kick out of that song. Darkest Hours, another one of my favourites. It's a ballad kind of in the vein of Coming Home and Blood Brothers. It's like a 7-minute long full-on ballad. Doesn't pick up pace at any point, but there's some really cool melodic ideas in there. Steve Harris's bass is keeping rhythm so tight, and obviously Bruce has come up with some really cool vocal melodies in this one. And the final track on the album is also one of my favourites. It's Hell on Earth, one of the 3 epics, which I will get back to, but Hell on Earth specifically, again, I think it's just got some insane riffing. It's got some really catchy hooks that I really enjoy. I think the build-up on it is really good. Those are the specific tracks that I really got a kick out of. Now to go over a few negatives that I wasn't necessarily keen on. I've seen a lot of people online really like the track The Time Machine, and I just don't really see it. I do enjoy it. I don't particularly like the verse. I think the vocal melody that Bruce is singing isn't particularly good. It feels kind of amateur. Once you get past that, though, the song is really good, but I certainly wouldn't say it's one of my favourites on the album, but, you know, that's just me. We might as well talk about the epics now. The last 3 tracks on the album, which do test your patience, even for a true Maiden fan. These 3 tracks were solely written by Steve Harris, so I went in thinking I'm really going to enjoy this, because Steve Harris is one of my favourite songwriters of all time. But they all, other than Hell on Earth, to an extent, they all kind of blur into one. You know, The Death of the Celts is basically the Klansman 2. It's a very similar thematic structure, and the Parchment is probably the only song on the album I really am not that keen on. There's no real catchy, discernible hooks that come back again. It just feels like one section, then another section, then another section, then another section. And I know Modern Maiden does that a lot, but I think they're riffing on, say, something like The Wild Wind Blows off The Final Frontier. Yes, it is section after section after section, but the riffing and the melodic ideas in it are really good and catchy, that bits of it stick in your head. The Parchment doesn't do that for me at all. It's one that I kind of have, that does feel like a bit of a chore for me to sit through. And so that's specific songs, which I think aren't quite for me. But the album really only there's one big flaw in it that I don't like. And it is a bit nitpicky, but it's something that bothers me every time I hear it. Bruce Dickinson's vocals on this album. He is an amazing singer. He's always been an amazing singer, particularly considering his age. It's staggering some of the stuff he's doing. But his melodic vocal ideas, I can't tell if he's getting a bit lazy, because he quite regularly mimics the guitar part for his vocals, but he's doing it all the time on this album. Pretty much every single song does this in the verse and or the chorus. And I don't know if he comes up with a vocal melody and then whoever it is, Adrian or Yannick or Dave, then decides to copy it on guitar, or if it's the other way around. But even when he's not mimicking the guitar, his vocal part, it sounds like a guitar run, like it's really like conjunct and scalic all the time, and it just feels a bit amateur to me. It's not a huge deal because he still sells it really well, but it's one of those things that as soon as I notice that he's just singing the guitar part, it just kills it for me. It just makes me think that either him or the guitar, they just got a bit lazy and just copied the other. And it's just one of those things where, you know, when a song, what song was it? I think it might be Death of the Celts, where everything cuts out and then Bruce sings a vocal line and it sounds like a guitar part, and I'm like, okay, 5 seconds from now the guitar's going to come in and do exactly the same thing, and sure enough it comes in and plays exactly what he just did but on the guitar. That was the one thing that gripes me with this album, is annoyingly Bruce Dickinson, which is a shame because he's one of my favourite frontmen of all time. But that's kind of it. I mean, these kind of albums are always really hard to talk about when your favourite band of all time releases an album which you do really enjoy, but you don't go crazy over for a couple of really silly reasons. But I think if you like Modern Maiden, this is certainly one that you're going to continue to enjoy. I've seen a lot of people online claim that this is the best album they've done in years. I don't really know about that. I'd still say Book of Souls is just a little bit better than this. I didn't even talk about Stratego. That was the second song they released ahead of the album. And again, I really enjoy the song. I love the chorus. I love everything they're doing. But again, it's just Bruce's vocals, particularly in the verse in this one. It sounds like he's not really even trying, which is a shame because it's Bruce Dickinson. You want him to sound huge and operatic and like Bruce Dickinson, but he doesn't quite do it for me on a lot of this album, which is a shame. So that's kind of my thoughts, I think. Otherwise I'm just going to ramble on forever. This is just a short segment. I'm sure in a few months' time my opinion of this album will change the more I listen to it. Yeah, I can't wait to see them play it live. I'm sure a lot of it will stack up well live. I just hope that they realise that songs like Days of Future Past, they still do that kind of thing really well, so they should do a lot more of it in future albums. We'll see how this album fares over time, I suppose.
Hello, my name is Ruben and you're watching Crushing Sounds, and today it is time at long last to review the widely anticipated album by heavy metal legends Iron Maiden. The album is called Senjutsu. So, what is there to be said about Iron Maiden that hasn't been said over the last 46 years they've been together now? Rising, I don't really need to go into the backstory, rising from the local pub circuit in London to quite possibly, even outside of metal, one of the biggest acts that perform on a stage that there's ever been. People outside the metal scene know who they are. and probably will be able to name at least one or two songs, or might know who Bruce Dickinson is. They've basically just become the very definition of a legacy band, in my opinion. Everything from the amazing artwork, just the logo font itself is so iconic and so just like influential on other metal bands and metal fashion and the scene, and just in every sense of the word, they completely embody heavy metal. So Senjutsu is their 17th studio album. They've done a fair few. It's the follow-up to the Book of Souls, which was released in 2016, so 5 years now. No, 2015 it came out, so 6 years, which is the longest gap between Maiden studio records at this point. And is it better? Is it worse? Well, we'll get into that. A lot of people are saying it's an improvement. I personally really enjoyed the Book of Souls, so that immediately set up expectations for me, which is a very dangerous game when it comes to reviewing things. So the album opens with the title track, Senjutsu itself, and it begins with a really cool, almost tribal sounding kind of military beat that drummer Nico McBrain plays on the toms. And there's some tasty little triplet licks in there. It's very like Danny Carey-esque, so immediately I'm all over it. Yeah, it's got a very strident, sort of triumphant, almost like marching to your last battle. Like this, you're probably going to die. You're like one of the 300 Spartans, or it's the last ride of the Rohirrim or something like that. That's the kind of feeling that it evokes for me, and it has a really interesting use of synths as well. It's kind of they're there in the background. They don't overpower the track, but they're enough to make you go, oh, okay, this is a bit sort of odd. Very reminiscent of their work on albums such as Somewhere in Time, and of course the iconic Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. The second track, which was the second single release from the album, Stratego. I'm going to go with Stratego. And immediately when it started, me and my brother were listening to this, and we were going, that riff, that's very kind of Opethy, that's cool. A very sort of minor little lead lick on the guitar. It's a contender for my favourite song on the album, I think, because it's probably the most reminiscent of like old school Maiden. Yeah, the verse is very reminiscent of the lead work on some of the tracks on albums like Brave New World. Fear of the Dark to a point as well. Like the drums on this track are absolutely outstanding. I mean, it's Nico McBrain, arguably one of the greatest drummers there's ever been. His kick drum is just so on point in this track, and across the whole album as well. And that's another point as well I need to make, is that, while many, including myself, will feel that Maiden's sound has fallen a fair bit since the departure of the great Martin Birch as producer after Fear of the Dark in 1992. They've never quite sounded as good since, in my own opinion, because that is just, that's the classic Maiden sound. But that being said, this new album, the production is quite good. I think it's very, very tight. The drums sound absolutely fantastic. You can hear every tom hit, every ghost note, every little flick of the cymbals, or whatever that Nico's doing. It sounds really crisp without sounding too sort of thin at the same time. And yet the pre-chorus in this track, Stratego, is I find it very reminiscent of the track Power Slave, which I don't mind, because it's a great song from a great album, so I'm not complaining. It's just classic Maiden. And then we come to track 3, which was the first song that they released from this album, and it was the first kind of new Maiden stuff we'd got in, like, I want to say about 6 years. The Writing on the Wall, and this might be my favourite one on the album. I think it's really cool. It's definitely got a country vibe to it. That kind of like, and that out in the desert driving sort of feel, which I really enjoy. And it definitely works as well with the amazing animated video that Bruce kind of creatively directed, or it was his concept, I believe, for that kind of Mad Max style video, which I think is fucking awesome. The riffs in this song, the leady kind of twangy almost riffs, I really, really like. I think it's not necessarily very maideny, but I think it's really cool. I really enjoy it, and it's a track you can sort of nod your head to. And I definitely think out of the whole album, this one's going to be the one that's the most fun to watch live. And then we come to where I think the album starts to dip a little with Lost in a Lost World, which is I feel it's a very Brucey song. It's 9.5 minutes long, so already you kind of go, oh God, that there's got to be a reason it's that long. I know it is Iron Maiden, and they're not. They're known for doing longer songs sometimes. They can pull it off. They've done it excellently in the past. There's nothing wrong with this song. I think it's decent. It's when you start to kind of go, oh, okay, it's just Iron Maiden being Iron Maiden at this point. It's not necessarily anything new under the sun. Because they have such a unique, specific sound, I kind of feel like after 17 albums, you're gonna eventually start to run out of ideas. And then from here on, I feel really bad saying this. The rest of the album for me kind of just like whatever. I'm not really bothered about ever seeing any of these songs live, or it's early days. I've only heard the album a few times at this point. So some of them might grow on me, but I can't see myself being really eager to go back to them. Days of Future Past. It's got a pretty memorable chorus, I think. I really like the guitar solo in this song. And then there is a really cool dynamic shift into a kind of marching section, which I like dynamics in my music quite a lot. I think it's very important to balance the light with the soft, or the heavy with the soft even. And then we come to, I think, probably the two weakest tracks in the album, The Time Machine, which, when I saw the title, I thought, oh, that's really cool. That'd be exciting, because it's one of my favourite H.G. Wells novels, or novella. It's a short book, isn't it? So it's fine. It's just, like I say, it's just the band doing what they do, and it kind of feels like, okay, well, nothing particularly standing out about this track, but sure. Darkest Hour is quite cool. It's a song I reckon it's about Winston Churchill. Reference the Darkest Hour. Of course, refers to that time, World War II, when an invasion from the German army was basically imminent into the UK. And Bruce Dickinson refers to the Black Dog, which is, of course, something that Churchill himself referred to in regards to his mental health. I really, really like the ambience at the end. I'm a sucker for ambience, especially when it involves like seagull noises and the sea for some reason. Ever since I first heard Ocean Machine by Devin Townsend, the end of the track Funeral, where you have like the kind of the synthy kind of seagull noises. I just like the sea, and it makes me feel nostalgic. So I really like that. And then we come to, I think, probably the three most problematic tracks in the album. 3 tracks in a row that are all over 10 minutes long, and this in itself could have been an EP. So Death of the Celts kind of just plods along. I think it's had about halfway through where we do get to some very nice bass and guitar like synchronized arpeggios, and then into like a lead guitar part which the bass also plays. I don't see bands doing this enough when the bass is used as a melodic instrument and just follows the guitar rather than kind of, and it's very important for the bass to sit back and just go with like, whatever the drummer's doing. At the same time, if you can fill out your sound enough where it's not an issue to take the bass away from the rhythm, then definitely do it. It's very, very cool to watch and to listen to. Maiden are definitely known as a bass heavy band, and by that I don't mean as in bass frequencies, I mean as in bass guitar. And there's a difference between bass guitar and bass, as John Entwistle, the late great John Entwistle from The Who, would tell you. About the 6.5 minute mark in Death of the Celts, though, something happens. You get this like triumphant synth, which I do really enjoy, when it kind of emulates that brass or military like trumpets. It's like, let's fucking, this is the last charge. And the Parchment, I'm gonna say it, this did not need to be nearly 13 minutes long. Again, like Death of the Celts, It's got a very sort of plodding feel to it. Rhythm guitar just seems to be losing power, I think, buried under the synthesizers. There's Steve Harris, and it is, it's at the point, I want to say the last 2 or 3 minutes, which is just guitar solo after guitar solo, and I don't want to use this word, but it does come across as just a bit overindulgent. And it's at this point where you start to go like, fucking hell, this album goes on forever. I don't think this is a song that's going to get played live, probably ever, because it's 12 and a half plus minutes long. So it takes up quite a chunk of your set. And when you're a band like Iron Maiden, you need to make room for the classics, of which there are quite a fair few. A triumphant synth comes in around the 6.5 minute mark, followed by a glorious set of guitar solos. And if you know Maiden as well as I do, you'll know that the guitar team of Dave Murray and Adrian Smith, and Yannick Gers, who was also in the band for some reason, they're just iconic. Those really full sounding lead tones they come up with are just incredible. No one else can emulate how they sound, in my opinion. So then we come to the closing track, Hell on Earth, which I think is the best of the final 3 massive songs. Kind of nice intro that starts off the song, maybe a bit too long. It is almost 3 minutes. And then we have a fill stolen straight from Gavin Harrison. If you know the song Let's Sleep Together by Porcupine Tree, you kind of go, oh, that sounds familiar. And it's what you want from a Maiden record. It's a galloping, epic, energetic song to finish the album. And I also really like the way that this song ends with just a really gradual fade out, and it leaves you to just reflect in silence. I really love when albums do that, and when it's just silence at the end, and you can kind of just go, okay, that's kind of nice. So my overall opinion on Senjutsu is, it's not... I don't want to use the word disappointing, because it really isn't. It's still a great album. It's still got some really cool stuff on here. There's a couple songs now I really like. There's some moments on some of the songs I really enjoy. And also, for Maiden to suddenly go, only about 6 or 8 weeks ago, new album, by the way, here you go, have it. And it's like, oh, okay, nice one, guys, cheers. That's something that brightened up my year. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. It's just Maiden doing Maiden. I'm a sucker for the older stuff, like, your Power Slave, Number the Beast, Killers. Not only I kind of feel like with this album, and a lot of the albums they've done since the early 90s, they've not only been kind of like a bit derivative of their sound, just kind of going, well, that's just the classic Maiden sound, let's just keep doing that, and we don't really do anything new. I that's probably not what's going on in their camp. I don't know any of the band personally, obviously. I've met Bruce once at a book signing. That's about it. I also feel like it's kind of lost a fair bit of the punch and the power in their sound, which you could argue is because, well, Ruben, they're in their 60s, they're pushing 70 at this point. Nico himself is 69. So, why wouldn't they want to mellow out a bit? And I'm kind of like, well... They haven't really, though, because he's still... Nico can still play Where Eagles Dare. And I'm 25 and I can barely fucking play that thing on drums. It's ridiculous. So if he can play that, I'm not really sure why they're kind of trying to go with this more proggy, lighter direction. Ever since Fear of the Dark, really. And less of a kind of, the power and the gallops and the big crunchy riffs and the leads that for me, is what got me into Maiden in the first place. It's why I adore their 80s albums so much. But just to conclude, this isn't a negative review. It's a good album. I enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing some of these songs live. I'm very much looking forward to seeing them tour the UK. I'm glad they're still going. I'm glad they're still writing music, of course. Because at the end of the day, they're living the dream. They've got the music is their career, which is something a lot of us would definitely want to have. for sure.
So there you go, our thoughts on the new Iron Maiden album Senjutsu. Hopefully we gave you some separate insight. Hopefully we weren't just all repeating each other. Maybe they'll think I'm full of shit, so you never know. Maybe I think they're full of shit. We will find out. Well, you guys already know. I'll find out soon enough. What did you guys think of the new Iron Maiden album? There's opinions all over the board for this one, so I'm very interested to hear what your thoughts are. Let us know what you think. It seems to be very divisive. Thanks as always for watching. Go listen to some amazing heavy metal and have a great second half of the heavy metal calendar. Bye bye for now.
Hello, my name is Ruben, and welcome to Crushing Sounds. I'm going to do that again. I don't know if I'm meant to be doing this intro or not, because Chris hasn't told me, so I don't know what's going on. Intro rolls. Chris and Mike says some wanky shit. Okay, so the part I really enjoyed in Death of the Celts is about the 6.5 minute mark, when a triumphant synth comes in around... do that again. Definitely got that out.